in Alderdice High School.
People running for their lives, panicking. This video from inside a church in Brighton Heights. A funeral was being live streamed when a barrage of bullets was fired right outside.
I don't know who did this, but whoever did this, let me tell you something. God gonna have his way with you, because there was no reason for this to happen today.
The shooting prompted a massive police response. Officers from all over raced to the Destiny of Faith Church on Brighton Avenue. This, of course, just the latest in a string of violent incidents in the city.
Gunfire ripped through Cedar Avenue in Pittsburgh's north side. Loud, sudden, and devastating. Neighbors ducked for cover. Groceries scattered across the pavement. And the ordinary rhythm of the afternoon was instantly destroyed. When the shooting stopped, 20-year-old James Hornezes Jr. lay dying on the street. John wasn't just another name in a headline. He was a son, a brother, and a basketball player whose focus on the court mirrored the determination he carried in life. Off the court, he was working on his HVAC certification, laying the foundation for a stable future. At only 20, he was carving a path forward, balancing ambition with humility, and carrying the best of his community with him. But on that October day, his promise was cut short. A black SUV rolled down the block, tension rose, and a sudden volley of bullets ended his life. Innocent bystanders, a woman with her groceries, another waiting at a bus stop, were caught in the crossfire, further deepening the day's tragedy. For John's family, grief came swiftly, but peace never followed. 13 days later, as loved ones gathered at his funeral, the cycle of violence struck again. Gunfire shattered the service itself, denying his family even the dignity of mourning in safety. This is the story of James Hornezes Jr., a young man with dreams, whose life was stolen in seconds, and whose memory was overshadowed by violence that refused to stop. His tragedy is not just about one death, but about how grief itself was torn apart by more bloodshed. Welcome to Dark Trace Crime Stories. Before we continue with this story, kindly subscribe and turn on notifications. Join our community as we uncover the truth behind the tragedies shaping our neighborhoods. Like and share this video to create more awareness. And if you've ever witnessed or been affected by violence, share your thoughts in the comments below. Before the violence that claimed his life, James Hornezes Jr. was known for his easy smile, his love of basketball, and his determination to build something better for himself and his family. At just 20 years old, John stood at a point in life where youthful energy meets adult responsibility, and those who knew him saw a young man working hard to make both worlds align. John grew up in Pittsburgh's North Side, a community defined by resilience as much as it is by struggle. The neighborhood had its challenges: gun violence, poverty, and cycles of hardship that too often swallowed young lives before they had a chance to fully begin. But for John, the North Side wasn't just a backdrop to his story. It was home. From a young age, John gravitated toward basketball, not only as a pastime, but as an outlet. On the court, he was focused, fast, and driven, qualities his family often pointed to as reflections of who he was off the court as well. The discipline of the game gave him a sense of purpose, and the community that rallied around local basketball provided him with role models and peers who shared his determination to rise above the limitations of their environment. But John's ambitions stretched beyond the hardwood. He was pursuing certification in heating, ventilation, and air conditioning HVAC, a skilled trade that promised steady work and independence. It was a deliberate choice, one that showed maturity and foresight. His friends said he wanted more than quick money or shortcuts. He wanted a future that would last. His loved ones often described him as someone who kept people together, bridging bonds within a family that leaned on each other to withstand the difficulties of their environment. This balance between ambition and environment, between love of community and the dangers that sometimes came with it, defined John's world. His story cannot be separated from the North Side, a neighborhood that shaped him and so many others. It was a place of culture, grit, and determination, but also one where gunfire was too familiar a sound, and where the line between promise and peril was always thin. John's life embodied that contradiction. He was working to rise above, but he remained rooted in the very streets where opportunity and tragedy walk side by side. That tension would ultimately become central to his fate, as the same community that nurtured him also became the stage for his sudden and devastating death. October afternoons in Pittsburgh's North Side usually carried a quiet rhythm. Neighbors moving through errands, children's laughter drifting from nearby parks, and the occasional hum of traffic. On Cedar Avenue that day, the ordinary seemed firmly in place. People walked along the sidewalks, chatting with friends, checking phones, and carrying groceries. Among them was James Hornezes Jr., 20 years old, with a plan to finish some errands before heading to basketball practice, a place where his focus and drive came alive. John had always navigated his world with awareness. Friends described him as calm but attentive, someone who carried himself with a quiet confidence that made him reliable and approachable. Yet even a young man as conscientious as John could not escape the escalating tension that had been simmering in his neighborhood. Weeks of disputes, personal conflicts whose details remain a shadow in the public record, had created a ripple of unease in the area. That afternoon, a black SUV appeared down Cedar Avenue, moving slowly and deliberately. The presence of the vehicle was enough to stop conversations and pull heads toward the street. Neighbors instinctively knew the ordinary had been interrupted. John noticed it too, and moments later, the confrontation escalated. He and those with him engaged in the shooting after the SUV arrived, attempting to defend themselves in the chaos. In the exchange, a friend was struck in the leg, sustaining a painful but non-fatal injury. The gunfire was sudden, sharp, and relentless. The calm of the street shattered into chaos. John was hit, but he did not die at the scene. He collapsed, severely injured, while still clinging to life long enough for emergency responders to transport him to medical care. The young man who had carried the promise of a future was now fighting for it in a hospital. Innocent bystanders were caught in the crossfire. An elderly woman carrying groceries dropped them as she fell to the pavement. A younger woman, checking her phone at a nearby bus stop, never saw the bullets coming. Both were killed, victims of a confrontation that had nothing to do with them, their lives stolen in a matter of moments. The street, once ordinary, became a scene of devastation. Witnesses later described screams echoing through the block, neighbors rushing toward the injured, while others ducked behind cars and walls to avoid the gunfire. Grocery bags lay scattered, phones forgotten, and the abrupt roar of the SUV leaving the scene left the air thick with shock and disbelief. Emergency responders arrived quickly. They tended to John, whose injuries were severe, as well as the friend with the leg wound. Despite the immediate medical attention, the two innocent bystanders could not be saved. Officers and paramedics worked amid the chaos, balancing urgent care with the wider panic as neighbors looked on, some in horror, others in stunned silence. The weight of loss was immediate and profound. Community reaction was swift and anguished. Onlookers described a sense of helplessness. Streets they had walked daily, where children had played and neighbors had gathered, had suddenly become a reminder that violence could strike anywhere. The North Side, already shaped by economic strain and prior disputes, now faced the harsh reality that even familiar streets offered no guarantees of safety. The shooting was more than a personal tragedy. It was a statement about the ripple effect of violence. John's family faced grief, compounded by the shocking loss of two innocent lives. Neighbors questioned how such a confrontation escalated so quickly, and the larger community struggled with the sudden intrusion of bloodshed into ordinary life. The ripple effect extended further than Cedar Avenue, reaching schools, local businesses, and families who had known John and the victims in passing or closely. For John's family, the weight of the loss was immense. Their son had been building a future grounded in ambition, skill, and connection to his community. Basketball practice, certification classes, family dinners, all were ordinary moments that became impossibly precious in the aftermath. The trauma of witnessing their child's potential cut short was intensified by the awareness that his death was public, violent, and preventable under different circumstances. The collateral damage, the two innocent bystanders killed, served as a stark reminder that violence rarely remains contained. It spreads unpredictably, claiming lives and shattering the security of anyone nearby. Families who had no part in the conflict now faced mourning. Emergency responders confronted the human cost firsthand, and neighbors who had previously walked the streets without worry now carried the weight of fear and grief. As law enforcement began investigating the scene, the North Side felt the reverberations. Conversations shifted from daily routines to safety precautions. Parents questioned whether their children could play outside, and friends of John and the victims grappled with the reality that moments of ordinary life could turn fatal in the blink of an eye. Cedar Avenue, once an ordinary street in an ordinary neighborhood, had been transformed into a site of mourning, reflection, and urgent questions about the broader patterns of violence that threatened communities. This moment also raises difficult questions for viewers. How can violence be prevented before it claims lives? What measures can communities take to ensure that disputes do not escalate so quickly? The shooting on Cedar Avenue did not just end with the gunfire. It marked the beginning of a chain reaction, grief, fear, and reflection rippling through families, friends, and the community. James Hornezes Jr., his friend injured in the exchange, and the two innocent victims left behind a legacy of warning. That moments of conflict can escalate rapidly. Ordinary days can turn tragic, and the consequences of violence are often far-reaching and irreversible. 13 days after the tragedy on Cedar Avenue, the community had gathered once more, this time in solemn reflection rather than daily routines. Friends, family, and neighbors came to mourn James Hornezes Jr., a young man whose life had been violently interrupted while pursuing his ambitions. The funeral was meant to be a sanctuary, a place where grief could be shared, memories could be honored, and closure, however limited, could begin. The chapel was filled with a quiet, heavy reverence. Floral arrangements lined the aisles and photographs captured moments of John's life. The basketball court where he had honed his focus, family gatherings where laughter and warmth had been abundant, and snapshots of everyday life in the North Side that reflected both promise and struggle. Families huddled together, supporting one another as the service moved forward. The air, dense with sorrow, carried the unspoken hope that this day, at least, would remain peaceful. But that expectation was shattered. A black SUV, eerily similar to the one present on Cedar Avenue, approached the funeral site. The vehicle's arrival sparked immediate tension, a flash of recognition among those familiar with the prior shooting. Seconds later, gunfire erupted. The sound was sudden, deafening, and chaotic, cutting through the solemnity of the service. Panic erupted. Attendees screamed, ducking behind pews, doors, and floral displays, while some desperately tried to shield others from the hail of bullets. The shooting left 6 individuals injured, including close family members and friends of John. Reports indicate that a 66-year-old man sustained injuries and was transported to Allegheny General Hospital. A 57-year-old woman was also injured and hospitalized at Allegheny General. A 27-year-old man sustained wounds and received care at Allegheny General. A 24-year-old man was injured and treated at the same hospital. A 20-year-old man sustained injuries and was hospitalized. A juvenile was injured and transported to UPMC Children's Hospital. Eyewitness accounts described the scene as utter chaos. Children attending with their families were hurried to safety. Elderly relatives were assisted from the premises, and friends tried to account for everyone present. Paramedics and police worked quickly to tend to the wounded while securing the area. Social media posts from those present captured overturned chairs, shattered glass, and the sheer panic that had gripped the chapel. Among those apprehended in connection with the attack were individuals with prior criminal histories, ranging from firearm offenses to violent disputes. Their involvement underscored a pattern that had long challenged the North Side community: how past behaviors, unaddressed conflicts, and access to weapons can converge to create repeated tragedies. Law enforcement noted that the suspect's records provided context for understanding the escalation, though it could never justify the devastation inflicted on grieving families. The funeral shooting carried consequences that extended far beyond the immediate injuries. Families were forced to confront grief compounded by fear, knowing that the same forces that had claimed John's life could strike again in spaces meant to honor and console. For the North Side, the event served as a stark reminder of vulnerability, even in familiar and sacred spaces. Community leaders emphasized the need for vigilance, preventive measures, and awareness of the factors that allow violence to escalate. For John's family, the emotional toll was unimaginable. They had gathered to honor his life and find some sense of closure, only to be confronted with renewed violence, injury, and the terrifying awareness that grief itself could not be contained or protected. Every photograph, every floral arrangement, every whispered memory was now intertwined with panic and fear. The weight of loss had doubled, the promise of safety at memorial events shattered, and the impact of a single act of violence had reverberated across days, streets, and hearts. This moment also raises critical questions for viewers. How can communities shield grieving families from repeated violence? What responsibilities do authorities, neighbors, and local leaders have in anticipating escalation from past disputes? And how do we as a society ensure that tragedies do not repeat, leaving ordinary citizens at the mercy of cycles that seem impossible to break? Share your insights and thoughts in the comments below. Engaging with these issues can help foster awareness, dialogue, and potential change. The funeral shooting of John James Hornezes Jr. was more than a tragic extension of the events on Cedar Avenue. It was a stark, painful illustration of how unresolved conflicts, repeat offenders, and access to firearms can converge to devastate a community a second time. The chaos and injuries that unfolded left indelible marks on those who survived, forever altering perceptions of safety, mourning, and justice. The North Side learned that day that even moments intended for reflection and closure could not escape the reach of violence, and that healing, however necessary, would require confronting both grief and the conditions that allowed such tragedies to persist. The aftermath of the shooting at John James Hornezes Jr.'s funeral on October 28, 2022, unfolded swiftly within the legal system. Within days, law enforcement had arrested two individuals in connection with the incident: 19-year-old Sean Davis and 16-year-old Hezekiah Nixon. Both were charged with multiple offenses, including criminal attempted homicide, criminal conspiracy, aggravated assault, and firearms violations. Their arrests were a direct response to the violence that had erupted during the funeral service at Destiny of Faith Church in Pittsburgh's Brighton Heights neighborhood. The charges against Davis and Nixon were not their first encounters with the law. Davis, who had been under electronic monitoring at the time of the shooting, had previously been involved in criminal activities. Notably, 2 days before the funeral shooting, Allegheny County Adult Probation received an alert indicating that Davis had removed his ankle monitor. However, no immediate action was taken, allowing him to remain at large and allegedly participate in the shooting. Nixon, despite his youth, had a history of criminal behavior. He was later charged in connection with a separate homicide on the north side of Pittsburgh that occurred in August 2022, prior to the funeral shooting. This pattern of escalating violence highlighted concerns about the effectiveness of the juvenile justice system and the challenges of rehabilitating young offenders. The legal proceedings that followed were marked by public scrutiny and debate. Both Davis and Nixon were ordered to stand trial as adults, a decision that sparked discussions about the appropriateness of charging minors in adult court, especially in cases involving violent crimes. The community's reaction was mixed, with some advocating for harsher penalties to deter future violence, while others questioned the long-term effectiveness of such an approach for young offenders. The legal journey for the Cedar Avenue shooters followed a separate path. Initial reports and witness statements tied Sharon Troutman and Hines to the fatal incident. Both had prior records involving assault and firearms violations, highlighting a persistent issue of recidivism. Their prior encounters with the justice system did not prevent them from participating in a confrontation that claimed 3 lives. Court proceedings included careful review of evidence, plea negotiations, and hearings where their criminal histories were central to arguments for harsher sentencing. Beyond the courtroom, the incident prompted a broader examination of police failures and systemic issues. The Hornezes family and community leaders had specifically requested law enforcement presence at John Jr.'s funeral, fearing a repeat of violence. Yet, the officers assigned to the detail never showed up, leaving mourners unprotected. This breach of trust fueled community outrage and intensified the emotional weight of the tragedy. Mayor Ed Gainey condemned the lapse, while Pittsburgh Police Commander Richard Ford called for an internal review of protocols. The Citizen Police Review Board's Executive Director Beth Pittinger emphasized the urgent need for improved risk assessment and better engagement with residents. This public scrutiny underscored a broken system where procedural oversights can have devastating consequences. The role of prior criminal records in the prosecution and sentencing of Davis and Nixon was a focal point during court hearings. Prosecutors emphasized their histories of violent offenses to argue for stringent bail conditions and longer sentences. Defense attorneys, on the other hand, highlighted their ages and backgrounds, suggesting that rehabilitation should be prioritized over punitive measures. This legal tug-of-war underscored the complexities of balancing justice with the potential for reform in young individuals. Beyond the courtroom, the incident prompted a broader examination of community safety and systemic failures. The fact that Davis was able to commit a violent act while under electronic monitoring raised questions about the effectiveness of current probation and parole systems. Advocates for reform pointed to this lapse as evidence of the need for more stringent oversight and accountability within the justice system. Additionally, the shooting highlighted the challenges faced by communities in addressing gang-related violence. The connection between the funeral shooting and the earlier triple homicide on Cedar Avenue suggested an ongoing gang conflict, raising concerns about the safety of public spaces and the ability of law enforcement to prevent such incidents. In response to these events, community leaders and activists called for comprehensive reforms, including improved youth intervention programs, better coordination between law enforcement agencies, and increased community engagement to address the root causes of violence. The hope was to break the cycle of retaliation and create a safer environment for residents, particularly the youth who were most at risk. Ultimately, the legal proceedings and ongoing investigations highlighted the limits of a reactive system. While arrests, charges, and court hearings sought to deliver justice, the broader lesson lay in the gaps that allowed these acts to occur. The combination of prior criminal behavior, probation oversight failures, and missed police protection created an environment where violence could escalate unchecked. The community's call was clear: justice must extend beyond the courtroom, addressing prevention, intervention, and systemic accountability to truly honor the victims and protect future generations.
For you at 6 about the two teenagers charged in Friday's funeral shooting. 6 people were injured. At 5, we were digging into the past of one of the suspects who has been linked to the shooting that happened at Ross Park Mall last year. And he was charged with firing a gun inside the mall. But those charges were later dropped. And now at 6, we're looking into the criminal history of the second suspect.
That's right. And Target 11 investigator Rick Earl joins us live in the studio with what he's uncovered about this. Rick?
Yeah, guys, because he's a juvenile, most of his records are sealed. But sources tell Target 11 this isn't the first time that the 16-year-old suspect allegedly opened fire. 16-year-old Hezekiah Nixon and 19-year-old Sean Davis in this exclusive video arrested by police and charged with attempted homicide after allegedly opening fire outside a funeral in Brighton Heights last Friday, wounding 5 people. Target 11 has learned that both Nixon and Davis have been in trouble before. Sources say Nixon was charged as a juvenile with aggravated assault after firing a weapon into a crowd of people. No one was hit, and according to sources, Nixon was sent to an after-school program. In August of 2020, according to court documents, Davis was arrested and charged with aggravated assault with a gun. And while he was out on bond, he was one of 2 teens accused of firing shots inside Ross Park Mall after a fight last year. No one was hit, but panicked shoppers raced for cover. Sources say that case was eventually dismissed after a judge ruled there were identification issues, even though Davis had gunfire residue on his hands. Davis' bond was then revoked in the assault case, and in April of this year, he pleaded guilty and was released from the county jail after serving 7 months of his 10 to 23-month sentence. He was ordered on electronic monitoring for 6 months. The Friday of the funeral shooting would have been his last day on electronic monitoring. Sources also tell Target 11 Davis was charged as a juvenile with possession of a firearm in both 2018 and 2019. It's unclear what happened in those cases because the records are sealed. Earlier this month, a Pittsburgh police commander expressed frustration with the system.
I'm tired of going out to these scenes and seeing what I'm seeing every day, and everybody else looking back at us as if it's a problem that we can solve alone. We can't.
John James Hornezes Jr. was more than the tragic headlines that followed his death. He was a son, a brother, a friend, and a young man with aspirations that stretched far beyond the streets of Pittsburgh's North Side. His life was marked by ambition, a love for basketball, and a quiet determination to build a better future. The promise he carried was evident to anyone who knew him, and his absence has left a profound void in the lives of those who loved him. The chain of events, from a fatal shooting on Cedar Avenue to the violence at his funeral, reflects a harsh reality. When cycles of conflict go unchecked, tragedy can follow even into spaces meant for mourning and reflection. Yet, amid this heartbreak, the story of John Jr. also underscores the resilience and strength of a community determined to honor his memory. Family, friends, and neighbors have rallied together, not only to grieve, but to insist on accountability, reform, and vigilance. Their actions are a testament to the power of collective care in the face of loss. John Jr.'s life, though cut short, serves as a reminder of what is at stake when communities come together. Every basketball game he played, every step he took toward his HVAC certification, and every moment he spent lifting those around him reflected potential, hope, and the simple joys of ordinary life. Celebrating these facets of his story helps ensure that he is remembered not only for the tragedy that ended him, but for the fullness of the life he lived. The events surrounding his death and the subsequent funeral shooting also raise critical questions about how communities, authorities, and individuals respond to violence. Vigilance, open communication, and proactive engagement can help prevent future tragedies. While systemic reform is essential, it is also the shared responsibility of neighbors, mentors, and local organizations to create a safer environment for the next generation. By learning from John Jr.'s story, communities can take meaningful steps toward protecting youth, supporting families, and curbing cycles of violence before they claim more lives. As we reflect on these events, it is important to honor John Jr. by keeping his memory alive in ways that matter. Share his story, engage with discussions about community safety, and advocate for change where you can. The conversation doesn't end with this video. It continues in how we act, speak, and ensure that others are not lost to preventable violence. If John Jr.'s story moved you, consider joining the conversation. Subscribe to the channel, leave a comment sharing your thoughts on how communities can prevent violence, and share this video to spread awareness. Your engagement amplifies voices that demand change and keeps the memory of John Jr. alive. In the end, the tragedy of John James Hornezes Jr. is a solemn reminder that every young life holds immense value. By remembering who he was, understanding the circumstances that led to his untimely death, and committing to proactive efforts, communities can honor him, not in sorrow alone, but in action, support, and hope for a safer future.